Are you feeling at rest this morning? If you're not sure, I invite you to just sit with that question for now. We'll come back to it after a tiny bit of time travel. This January, there was probably nothing I was more superstitious about than religiously and diligently drinking Airborne. If you're familiar, it's one of those little tablets. It's a little bit like Alka-Seltzer. It delivers a mega dose of vitamin C. You dissolve it in water, it kind of fizzes, and it tastes like watered down sugar-free Orangina. It is not exactly a taste treat. But there is a reason I was doing this, because at Meadville Lombard, which is the seminary where I study, our school schedule allows us for a lot of time working in our home communities and at our internship sites. But occasionally, we as a crowd of UU seminarians, we all descend upon Chicago to take a series of week-long intensive courses. That happens in January and usually again in March or April, and that's where I was for all of last month. I was still remembering my first intensive, which happened last year, and I was sick twice during that month. I was far from home, I was totally miserable, and so this year I took every possible precaution to keep it from happening again. There was constant water drinking and, of course, the Airborne. Ritually downed before and after every plane trip. It was sort of like a healing potion in a video game. And so after a month of 4 week-long classes and as many flights and approximately 3 days off in between all of this, I came home. The Airborne that I had faithfully been taking had worked somehow. I had managed to stave off what we students like to call the Meadville crud. I wrote my final papers over about 4 days after I returned, and I was so ready to come back to parish life immediately. And then that entire month of holding my breath and rushing and rushing and rushing finally caught up to me. My immune system did what I'm calling an end of semester belly flop across the finish line, and I got this head cold, this sinus thing, and I was out of commission for an entire week. It wasn't anything serious, but it did make me sleep a lot. So I spent that week feeling really upset that I was missing out on coming back here because I was so anxious to be back with you. But then one of my friends told me, look, after the month that you've just had, of course you need some rest, like real rest, not fake rest. Your body needs to get back to equilibrium. And I was like, of course, light dawns on Marblehead, right? So, to me, I actually find it a little bit scary how hard it is for us to remember rest, to let ourselves be present in that restorative, dormant place. If we're not forced into it by illness or by circumstance, it can feel almost like an illicit pleasure, something that we'll need to pay for later or that we need to ask permission to have. But I think we can be kinder to ourselves than that. Let's come back to the opening question. Are you feeling at rest? If you're not there right now, what do you think it would feel like if you were? The beginning of February is celebrated in some pagan traditions as a holiday called Imbolc, a day that some believe marks the first evidence of spring. But here in Maine, that seems more like wishful thinking than anything else. More often than not, there's a fresh new coat of snow on the ground, and what isn't covered is muddy. Snowdrops are widely touted as the flower that heralds the coming of Imbolc, but they're not native to this area. And in early February in Maine, the sight of flowers practically seems like a myth. But there are more layers to the symbolism of this holiday than the first layer of budding spring. We also find in the lore about Imbolc stories about the time of lambing. In the early Celtic world, Imbolc, which is a word that literally means in the belly, was the time of ewes giving birth to young lambs. It's perhaps this symbolism that is most resonating for me this year, where we don't really get the romance of the early snowdrops breaking through the muddy ground. I will admit that I'm no sheep farmer, but thinking about the aspect of midwifery, attending to what is about to be born, seems central to the meaning of this season for me. especially this year when I'm having so much difficulty allowing myself to slow down. In our time and in our country, birth is usually no longer biologically mysterious, but there is still much about gestation that happens as part of a hidden world. In fact, if we remember the story that was part of our children's focus this morning, we're reminded that the hidden world is all around us right now. In ecological science, this is called, the world of animals that live underneath the snow is called the sub-Nivean environment. Sub, so under, Nivean is snow. Some animals are sleeping through the season, but others are active and taking part in lives that we don't see. Seeds are lying dormant under the snow, waiting to turn into plants. But none of these things are happening in places that we can see with our eyes. In the natural world, there are many reasons why all this activity is hidden away. During the cold months of winter, small animals like shrews and mice and voles, like we read about, live busy lives in the sub-Nivean environment. So you can't see anything they're doing, but it's all underneath the snow. The snow provides protection from predators, and it allows them the space to thrive and survive to make more generations. This frozen blanket becomes a matter of survival for these animals. And I wonder, what if we were to think about our spiritual survival in such a way? Radical poet and activist Audre Lorde once said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." In case we're experiencing some curiosity around her choice of the word warfare, we must acknowledge that her point of view comes directly from the heart of her lived experience as a Black lesbian woman in America. The systems of entrenched white supremacy in American society, the systems of ingrained sexism and homophobia, still send the harmful message that lives like hers are not valuable. By choosing instead to care for her body, mind, and spirit, to resist burnout and see to the work of her own self-preservation, Audre Lorde lived a radical theology of survival. She recognized that it was impossible for her to be a superwoman, that she had human needs, that she was worthy of love, worthy of being valued, that not just her work, but her joy and renewal mattered, that her life mattered. Our lives, too, are full of demands. We need to make a living. We must be attentive to our families. We feel pressure to live out our values and show up for justice in a time when the ideals of radical hospitality and inclusive community feel like they're under attack. In some cases, like Audre Lorde, we're showing up for the rights of our communities to exist and to thrive. But in the moment, our individual survival ceases to be a priority to us, and we mistake, sometimes, acts of self-preservation for self-indulgence. We ask ourselves, are we doing enough? I'm not trying to say that we should stop speaking out and showing up for justice. In fact, I am saying exactly the opposite. We're needed to do this work now, more than ever. But too often, the passion and the dedication that we have for this work, this necessary, holy work, grows into an expectation that we put on ourselves. I certainly experience this. The expectation is that we can attend every rally, every vigil, every community event, every meeting, and still have time to take care of our bodies and our spirits. That we don't need to build self-care into our practice, and that we can burn the candle at both ends. But, as anyone who's tried to do this with an actual candle will know, using that method means that your candle is not going to last very long. Doing this hard work of building justice in community without taking the space to acknowledge what we're feeling, what our bodies and our spirits need, is to see ourselves as expendable. Instead of being like the mice under the snow, surviving wisely and persevering, we leave ourselves open to the predators of fatigue and burnout. When the desire to do our best to show up becomes an expectation that we all must be an exemplar at all times, we deny ourselves the space that we need to just be fully human. What does that feel like for you when you don't have the spaciousness that your spirit needs? For me, because I do experience this a lot, I feel a bit like my feet don't have a sense of the ground underneath them. It's very easy to think up here, but it's hard to feel. For you, not having that space might feel completely different. Maybe for you, it's a feeling of always being rushed. Maybe it's the shallow breathing that comes with anxiety. Maybe you feel like you're disconnected from the body that holds you. When we're wrapped up in this feeling, it's so easy to miss cues from our spirits that can tell us what to wisely do next. Poet Antonio Machado, in this morning's call to worship, wrote, "Has my heart gone to sleep? No, my heart is not asleep. It is awake, wide awake, not asleep, not dreaming. Its eyes are open wide, watching distant signals, listening on the rim of the vast silence." It's pretty rare to get a loud and clear directive that comes right from our souls. It can happen, but it's not the norm. In my experience, more often than not, the language of the Spirit is subtle. It's quiet. It is called the still small voice for a reason. Figuring out what it's trying to say isn't always easy, and rarely does it ask us to be complacent and move complacently. When we take the space to sit with ourselves and to breathe into our feelings, to dig down underneath the snow, we can hear it. When we give ourselves the space to see to our survival, our work of spiritual midwifery can begin, and we can start trying to live into these feelings and the inconvenient labor of the Spirit. Although we may be at rest, like the hibernating bear, our spirits do not sleep, and the eyes of our hearts are wide open. In the depths of winter, Imbolc reminds us, the earth is quickening. Under a crust of ice, the water of the river is moving. The current still flows, even when we can't see it, borne onto a sea of infinite possibility. Its surface may be still and covered by a blanket of snow, but underneath it there is a flow, like a love that never deserts us, that bears us up from below. The feelings that we sit with at rest in the silence of our gravid spirits are waiting to be born, and present at every birth is always, always love. The seeds stirring under the snow in time break through the soil and bloom. The power of the flowing current in time shatters the icy dam. And in time, the sun will part the clouds and spring will come again. What within you now is waiting to be born in time? With this wondrous love flowing like a river in our bodies, let us be enfolded in the shelter of renewal. Let us listen to the voices that come forth from the vast silence and call us onward. Let us remember that our will toward justice and peace is found in the fullness of our survival. And as we are surrounded, held, and sustained by this great love, may the eyes of our hearts open ever wider. Amen, and blessed be.
Our closing hymn